Top 1. The polybolos. The polybolos did not look like a weapon, it looked like a machine. That distinction is precisely what made it so dangerous and so deeply unsettling to every military engineer who has studied it since. In the 3rd century BC, a man named Dionysius of Alexandria designed something that should not have existed. Not in that era, not with those tools, and not with that level of understanding. He called it the polybolos. The Greeks used it quietly, deployed it selectively, and then, as if on cue, it disappeared from the historical record entirely. What it left behind was a description so technically advanced that modern weapons engineers have spent decades trying to make sense of it. The polybolos was a chain-driven, repeating bolt thrower. It did not fire once and require reloading. It fired continuously. A flat-linked chain connected to a system of gears and a magazine loaded with bolts allowed the weapon to cycle through ammunition with mechanical precision. The operator turned a handle, and the machine did the rest. Each bolt was automatically fed, positioned, and released in sequence without any pause between shots. In the 3rd century BC, this was not an improvement on existing weapons. It was a category of weapon that did not exist anywhere else on Earth. Modern weapons historians classify the polybolos as the earliest known automatic weapon in human history. It was not a primitive precursor or an early attempt, but the actual first. The mechanism it used, a flat-linked drive chain feeding a repeating magazine, would not be seen again in any weapon system until the 19th century AD. That is a gap of over 2,000 years. Engineers who have reconstructed the device from ancient descriptions confirm that the system functions exactly as recorded. It works, and it has always worked. The design required no revision. For decades, the polybolos existed only in texts. There was no physical evidence, no wreckage, and no confirmed archaeological trace. Skeptics used that absence to question whether the weapon had ever truly been mass-produced or deployed in battle. Then in 2026, researchers examining wall damage patterns at Pompeii identified impact marks inconsistent with any known single-shot artillery of the Roman period. The spacing, depth, and clustering of the damage aligned precisely with what a continuous fire bolt system would produce. While not conclusive, it was the first physical trace that something like the polybolos had been used effectively in the ancient world. What unsettles modern military analysts is not the weapon itself, but the silence that followed it. A device this significant and mechanically revolutionary does not simply vanish. Knowledge of this magnitude does not disappear by accident, yet no army after the Greeks developed it further. No Roman engineer expanded on it, and no record explains why the design was abandoned. The polybolos worked, but no one has been able to explain why the ancient world chose to forget it. Top 2. The Dacian Falx. Rome did not change its armor for any enemy lightly. In centuries of warfare against enemies across 3 continents, the Roman military machine adapted its tactics, formations, and strategy, but its armor remained largely consistent. It was tested, proven, and trusted. It took one weapon from one people in one specific region of the ancient world to force Rome to do something it had almost never done before. Add new pieces to the body of a Roman soldier. The Falx came from Dacia, a kingdom occupying what is now modern Romania. By the 1st century AD, the Dacians had developed a blade unlike anything in the Roman arsenal or anything Rome had previously faced. It was long, curved, and designed with its cutting edge on the inside of the curve rather than the outside. That single design decision changed everything. A weapon with an inward edge does not slash outward like a sword. It hooks, pulls, and draws inward with the full momentum of the swing behind it. Against an unprotected limb, the result was catastrophic. Against armor, it was something worse. The hook found gaps, caught edges, and used the attacker's own body weight to drag the blade through openings that a straight weapon could never reach. Roman soldiers encountered the Falx during the Dacian Wars under Emperor Trajan, fought between 101 and 106 AD. What they found in close quarters combat disturbed them enough to report it up the chain of command. The Falx was defeating armor that had protected Roman soldiers for generations. It was targeting arms, legs, and the sides of the body, areas that Larica segmentata, the standard Roman segmented armor, left exposed or only lightly protected. Soldiers were losing limbs, and the wounds were severe, deep, and often fatal before medical intervention was possible. Rome responded in a way that military historians still reference today. It issued new protective equipment specifically designed to counter one weapon. Roman soldiers fighting in Dacia were equipped with additional arm guards and leg guards, manica for the arms, and reinforced greave-style protection for the lower legs. These additions were not standard Roman military issue. They were a direct and specific response to the Faust. The Roman military, arguably the most sophisticated fighting force in the ancient world, redesigned its soldiers because of a curved blade carried by the people of a single kingdom. Modern military engineers and close-quarters combat specialists have studied the biomechanics of the Faust extensively. The hook and pull motion it employs generates force in a direction that most defensive equipment is not designed to handle. Contemporary tool and weapon designers working on close-quarters combat instruments have referenced the Faust geometry when developing implements that need to defeat modern protective gear. A blade from the 1st century AD is still being studied today, not as a historical curiosity, but as a working model. Top 3 Archimedes' death ray. It was not a catapult, it was not a battering ram, and it was not any weapon that Rome had encountered before or would encounter again. It was, if the accounts are to be believed, sunlight, focused, concentrated, and weaponized by a single man standing on the walls of Syracuse. And the Roman fleet, one of the most powerful naval forces in the ancient world, allegedly burned because of it. The year was 289 BC. Rome had dispatched a massive fleet under the command of General Marcus Claudius Marcellus to besiege the city of Syracuse on the island of Sicily. Syracuse was wealthy, strategically vital, and heavily defended. But its greatest defense was not its walls or its soldiers. It was its chief engineer. Archimedes of Syracuse was already considered the most brilliant mathematician and inventor of the ancient world. When Rome arrived at his city's shores, he went to work. Ancient accounts, including those of the historians Galen and Lucian, describe Archimedes directing soldiers and civilians to hold large polished bronze mirrors at precise angles toward the Roman ships anchored in the harbor. The mirrors, when aligned correctly, focused the sun's rays into a single concentrated point of intense heat on the wooden hulls of the Roman vessels. According to the accounts, the ships caught fire. The Romans, unable to explain what was happening to their fleet, were thrown into panic, and the siege was disrupted. For centuries, historians and scientists treated the story as legend. The physics seemed too complicated, the coordination too demanding, and the scale too ambitious for 214 BC. Then in 2005, a team of students and researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology decided to test it. They assembled an array of small flat mirrors and focused them on a mock-up of a Roman vessel. Under controlled conditions with direct sunlight and correct alignment, the wood reached ignition temperature. The test produced partial success. It worked, but only under ideal conditions: a specific sun angle, calm water, a stationary target, and precise mirror coordination. Mythbusters later attempted their own recreation and found the results inconclusive under realistic combat conditions. The ships moved, clouds interfered, and maintaining precise focus across a fleet of vessels in open water proved extraordinarily difficult. Their conclusion was skeptical, while MIT's conclusion was cautiously affirmative. The two results have never been reconciled. What military scientists found more interesting than the debate was the underlying principle. Focused solar energy as a directed heat weapon is not ancient fantasy. It is the foundational concept behind modern directed energy weapons and large-scale solar concentrators. Defense research programs studying laser-based and heat-based weapon systems have referenced the Archimedes model as an early proof of concept. Whether the Roman ships actually burned remains genuinely unknown. No physical evidence has been recovered, and no Roman military record confirms the event from their side. What is confirmed is that the Romans eventually abandoned the daylight assault on Syracuse entirely. Something on those walls made them stop. Top 4. The Plumbata. It was not the weapon anyone saw coming, and that was the entire point. Roman infantry stood in formation, shields raised, armor visible, and swords sheathed. The opposing force calculated the engagement, measured the distance, assessed the threat, and prepared for the moment the lines would close. What they did not know, and what they could not see, was that every single soldier standing in that Roman line was already holding a ranged weapon. Clipped silently to the inside of each shield, invisible from the outside, were the plumbata, and they were about to change the opening seconds of every engagement. The plumbata, also recorded under the name Martio Barbuli, was a lead-weighted throwing dart. It was not large or elaborate. It consisted of a short wooden shaft, a pointed iron tip, stabilizing flights at the rear, and a lead weight positioned just behind the head. That lead weight was the critical element. It shifted the center of gravity forward, giving the dart a flat, accurate trajectory over distances that a standard infantry throw could not reliably achieve. Roman soldiers could launch the plumbata at targets more than 30 meters away with meaningful accuracy. In combat terms, 30 meters is not a small distance. It is the space between a prepared formation and an advancing enemy, the space where the first casualties happen. The origins of the design stretch back further than Rome. Evidence of lead-weighted dart technology appears in Greek military contexts around 500 BC, suggesting the concept traveled through centuries of Mediterranean warfare before the Roman military standardized it. By the 4th century AD, the plumbata had become a formally issued weapon. The Roman military historian Vegetius documented that elite infantry units carried 5 plumbata per soldier, clipped inside the shield where they added minimal weight and created zero visual profile from the enemy's perspective. That last detail is the one that has drawn sustained attention from modern military theorists. The plumbata was not simply a throwing dart, it was a concealed secondary weapon integrated directly into the primary defensive equipment of frontline soldiers. Every infantryman in the formation carried it. It required no additional equipment, no separate carry system, and no visible indication to the enemy that a ranged capability existed within what appeared to be a purely close quarters unit. The tactical deception was built into the weapon's design. Modern infantry loadout philosophy, the concept of equipping frontline soldiers with layered, concealed, and secondary weapon systems, traces a direct intellectual line back to exactly this thinking. Military strategists who have studied the plumbata note that the Romans understood something that took modern armies centuries to formally codify. Every soldier is more effective when carrying a capability the enemy does not know exists. 5 darts clipped inside a shield, invisible until the moment they were released. The Romans called it standard issue. Modern militaries call it doctrine. The concept has never left. Top 5, Alrama's torpedo. It was written down, and that is what makes it undeniable. Not rumored, not suggested, and not reconstructed from damage patterns or battlefield accounts. A man sat down in the 1270s AD and described in precise technical detail a self-propelled incendiary device designed to travel across the surface of water and destroy ships. He included the materials, the construction method, and the stabilization system. He wrote it as an engineer writes a manual because that is exactly what it was. The world would not see anything functionally comparable for another 6 centuries. Hassan al-Rama was a Syrian military engineer working in the latter half of the 13th century AD. He produced a comprehensive military treatise known today as the Book of Military Horsemanship and Ingenious War Devices. The manuscript contained detailed instructions for incendiary weapons, explosive devices, and rocket-propelled projectiles. Among its contents was a description that naval historians and military engineers have returned to repeatedly over the past several decades. It described an egg-shaped device filled with flammable material, fitted with stabilizing fins, and powered by a self-propelling rocket charge. It was designed specifically to be launched across the surface of water toward enemy vessels. The stabilizing fins were not decorative. They served the same fundamental purpose that fins serve on every guided projectile ever built since. They controlled the flight path, kept the device oriented correctly during travel, and prevented it from tumbling or veering off course. Al-Rama understood in the 1270s AD that a projectile moving at speed across an unstable surface required geometric stabilization to reach its target. That understanding is the foundation of every torpedo and sea-skimming missile guidance system in existence today. The rocket charge Al-Rama specified used a composition derived from purified potassium nitrate, which he described refining himself. His treatise included detailed purification instructions for the propellant, indicating that he was not working from secondhand knowledge. He had tested these materials and understood their behavior. The propulsion system he described was functional, not theoretical. Naval engineers who have analyzed Al-Rama's torpedo design have noted the conceptual overlap with modern sea-skimming anti-ship missiles with considerable unease. The core principles, self-propulsion, surface travel, stabilized trajectory, and an incendiary payload delivered to the waterline of a vessel, are not approximate matches. They are direct conceptual parallels. The technology to execute those principles in the 13th century AD was limited, but the understanding behind them was not. The manuscript survived and currently exists in preserved form, studied by historians of science and military technology across multiple institutions. What it contains is not mythology or embellishment, but technical documentation written by a man who understood weapons engineering at a level that his era had no framework to fully support or continue. 6 centuries passed before the torpedo became a functional weapon of war. Al-Rama had already written the concept down, and no one has fully explained how. Top 6. The gastrophetes. It should not have existed in the 5th century BC, not because the materials were unavailable or because the Greeks lacked skilled craftsmen, but because the thinking required to build it represented a leap in engineering logic that no other culture had made at that point in history. The understanding that a human body could become part of a weapon's loading mechanism was revolutionary. Every bow before it was limited by the strength of the human arm. The gastrophetes looked at that limitation and removed it entirely. The name translates directly from Greek as belly bow. The name is functional, not poetic. The shooter placed the rear of the weapon against their stomach, positioned the front against the ground, and used the full weight of their body, pressing downward to compress the bowstring back into its locked firing position. The human arm, even a trained soldier's arm, can generate only a fraction of the force that a human body pressing downward with its entire weight can produce. The gastrophetes exploited that difference completely. The draw weight it achieved was beyond anything a handheld bow could physically reach. The bolts it fired carried proportionally greater force, greater range, and greater penetrating power than any personal range weapon that had come before it. The Greek engineer and writer Heron of Alexandria documented the gastrophetes in his work Bella Poetica, a technical treatise on war machines written around the 1st century AD, but drawing on earlier sources. His description was detailed enough for modern engineers to produce working reconstructions. Those reconstructions confirmed what the ancient texts claimed. The compression loading system functioned exactly as described. The mechanical advantage generated by bodyweight loading was substantial and measurable. This was not an approximation of a crossbow. It was a fully realized mechanical range weapon operating on principles that would define projectile weapon design for the next 2,000 years. What followed the gastrophetes historically is as significant as the weapon itself. It served as the direct developmental foundation for the ballista, the large-scale torsion artillery piece that the Greek and later Roman militaries deployed as battlefield and siege weapons. The same compression and mechanical advantage principles that one soldier used with his stomach against a handheld device were scaled upward into machines that required crews to operate. The conceptual DNA of the gastrophetes runs directly through the entire lineage of mechanical projectile weapons in Western military history. Modern ballistic weapon designers and ergonomic engineers have returned to the gastrophetes repeatedly. The specific problem it solved, how to maximize projectile force while working within the physical limitations of a human operator, remains a central challenge in personal weapons design today. The solution the Greeks arrived at in the 5th century BC, using the body itself as the loading mechanism, has been studied, modeled, and referenced in contemporary engineering research. A soldier pressed his stomach against a wooden stock and changed the direction of weapons technology permanently. That moment has never been fully accounted for. Top 7. The Urumi. It did not behave like a weapon. It behaved like a problem that conventional military training had no answer for. Every system of combat ever developed, every guard position, every defensive stance, and every pairing technique refined across centuries of warfare was built on a single foundational assumption, that an incoming blade travels in a predictable arc. That assumption held true for every edged weapon in human history. Swords, axes, spears, and daggers all move in lines or fixed curves that a trained defender can read, anticipate, and counter. The Urumi made that assumption irrelevant. The weapon originated in South India, and evidence of its use predates 300 AD, though historians believe the tradition of the Urumi extends considerably further back within the martial culture of the region. It was preserved and transmitted through Kalaripayattu, one of the oldest documented martial arts systems in the world, practiced in the Kerala region of southern India. Within that system, the Urumi occupied the highest tier of difficulty. It was the last weapon a student was taught, only after mastering every other form, because it was genuinely dangerous to its own user during training. The blade itself was a strip of razor-sharp, flexible steel, measuring up to 6 feet in length. It was thin enough to coil and thick enough to hold an edge capable of inflicting severe wounds. When not in use, it was worn wrapped around the waist of its carrier, disguised as a belt or sash. A trained fighter could draw and deploy it within a single fluid motion, making the transition from unarmed appearance to fully armed engagement almost instantaneously. The concealment was not incidental, it was a deliberate tactical feature. In combat, the Urumi functioned unlike any other edged weapon. Its flexibility meant that its tip and body moved in constantly shifting, overlapping arcs that no opponent could fully track. A skilled user could direct the general motion, but the precise path of the blade at any given instant was partially dictated by momentum and flex physics. It could reach around a shield's edge, find the gap between armor plates, and change direction mid-swing without any additional input from the fighter. Attempting to parry it with a rigid weapon created new danger. The blade would wrap around the parrying weapon and continue toward the defender's body. Modern special operations trainers and military martial arts program developers have studied the Urumi specifically because of this parry problem. Contemporary close-quarters combat systems are built on interception and redirection of incoming weapons, but the Urumi does not permit either with any reliability. Its arc physics have been analyzed in controlled environments, and the conclusions have been consistent. There is no conventional defensive response that reliably neutralizes it. A weapon worn as clothing, drawn in one motion, that cannot be parried. Military trainers studying it today use the same word that ancient opponents almost certainly felt the first time they encountered it: unanswerable. Top 8, the Falarica. It did not need to kill you, and that was what made it so effective and so deeply studied by military engineers in the centuries that followed. Most weapons in the ancient world were designed with a singular purpose: to wound or destroy the target they struck. The Falarica was designed around a more sophisticated calculation. It did not need to penetrate or reach flesh. It only needed to touch the one thing standing between a soldier and death, and then it needed to burn. The weapon came from the Iberian Peninsula, the region covering modern Spain and Portugal, and was in documented use by the 3rd century BC among the native Iberian peoples who would later become some of Rome's most formidable opponents. The Falarica was a javelin in its basic form, a wooden shaft designed to be thrown by infantry at close to medium range. But its construction departed from every standard javelin design in one specific and devastating way. The iron tip, long and heavy, was wrapped with tow, a bundle of coarse fiber made from flax or hemp. That wrapping was soaked thoroughly in pitch, the thick, dark resin used across the ancient world for waterproofing and as a burning agent. Immediately before throwing, the tip was set alight. What left the thrower's hand was not a javelin in any conventional sense. It was a burning projectile of considerable mass and momentum, trailing fire through the air toward its target. The weight of the iron tip was deliberately engineered to be heavy, serving a purpose that went beyond simple penetration. When the Falarica struck a wooden shield, even without punching fully through, its momentum drove the burning tip into the shield's surface and held it there. The pitch, already burning and now pressed against wood, transferred fire immediately and reliably. The tow wrapping continued to fuel the flame. A Roman soldier holding a shield with a Falarica burning in it faced an impossible choice in the middle of an active engagement. He could keep the shield and accept the fire moving toward his arm and body, or he could drop it. Dropping a shield in a Roman infantry formation was not a simple personal decision. It created a gap, exposed the soldier beside him, and broke the integrity of the line. The Phalarica was not simply attacking the individual soldier, it was attacking the formation itself. The Roman historian Livy documented the Phalarica in his accounts of the siege of Saguntum in 219 BC, describing the weapon in enough detail to confirm its construction and its effect on Roman allied forces. His account noted the particular terror it produced, not just because of the fire, but because of the sound and the sight of burning projectiles crossing the air in large numbers simultaneously. Modern incendiary munitions designers have studied the Phalarica's dual damage concept carefully. The combination of mechanical impact and persistent incendiary effect delivered through a single thrown weapon represented an approach to anti-material and anti-personnel design that remained conceptually influential. It forced a choice, and either choice cost something. Top 9. The Chirobalistra. It was small enough for one soldier to carry, and that was the detail that changed everything. Artillery in the ancient world was a crew operation, requiring multiple men to transport, assemble, aim, and fire. It was a siege tool, a battlefield support system, and a weapon of position and preparation. It was not, under any definition that existed before the 1st century AD, something a single infantryman picked up and carried into engagement. The Romans looked at that limitation with the same systematic precision they applied to every problem of warfare. And then they built something that made the limitation disappear. The Chirobalistra was a hand-carried torsion bolt shooter constructed entirely from metal. That material choice alone separated it from everything that had come before it. Standard ballista frames were built from wood, which introduced variability. Wood warped in moisture, dried in heat, and shifted under repeated stress. Metal did not. The all-metal frame of the Chirobalistra maintained consistent tension and alignment across varying weather conditions and repeated firing cycles. It was lighter than its wooden predecessors, despite being mechanically more sophisticated, and it was considerably more accurate because its frame did not flex or shift between shots. The Roman technical writer Heron of Alexandria described the Chirobalistra in documented detail, providing specifications precise enough that modern engineers and military historians have produced working reconstructions. Those reconstructions revealed something that surprised even experienced analysts. The weapon incorporated adjustable sighting mechanisms. A Roman soldier carrying this device in the 1st or 2nd century AD had access to a personal range weapon with functional aiming adjustment built directly into its frame. The concept of adjustable sights on a personal weapon is treated in modern firearms history as a relatively recent development, yet the Romans had implemented it 2,000 years earlier on a man-portable torsion weapon. The bolt it fired was not a light projectile. It carried sufficient force at distances exceeding 100 meters to defeat the armor worn by enemy soldiers of the period. Reconstructions fired under controlled conditions confirmed the penetration data. At ranges where most ancient ranged weapons were losing accuracy and force, the Chirobalistra was still delivering armor-defeating energy to its target with precision. A single soldier standing over 100 meters from an armored opponent could reliably penetrate that armor with a weapon he had carried to the battlefield himself. Military historians studying the development of personal precision weapons have identified the Chirobalistra as the first documented attempt to create a man-portable anti-armor system. The specific combination of characteristics it achieved, individual carry weight, mechanical precision, adjustable sighting, and armor-defeating capability at extended range, defines the category of weapon that modern militaries call a precision anti-material rifle. The Romans had no such terminology. They simply had a problem, which was that enemy soldiers wore armor, and a solution, which was a metal device one man could carry that would defeat that armor from a distance. The solution worked at over 100 meters in the 1st century AD. Modern variants of the same concept work at over 1,800 meters today. The thinking behind both is identical. Top 10. The Kestra Sphendone. Nobody could agree on what it was, and that was the first problem. Soldiers who encountered it on the battlefield reported wounds that did not match any known projectile. They had seen arrow wounds, they had treated javelin injuries, and they understood what a standard sling bullet did to a human body at range. The Kestra Sphendone produced something different. The entry was wrong, the depth was wrong, and the damage pattern was wrong. Field physicians and military commanders who examined casualties caused by the Kestrus Fendone were looking at a wound profile that did not fit any weapon in their existing understanding. Because the Kestrus Fendone was not any weapon in their existing understanding. It was two weapons compressed into one, and it behaved like neither. The weapon emerged in the military context of ancient Macedon and the kingdom of Pergamon in the 2nd century BC, a period of intense military innovation across the eastern Mediterranean world. Its construction was deliberately hybrid. A dart resembling in form a short arrow or miniaturized javelin was fitted at the rear with a sling pouch or binding that allowed it to be launched from a standard sling. The sling provided the rotational energy and range, while the dart provided the mass concentration and penetrating geometry. What left the sling was not spinning like a conventional sling bullet and not flying like an arrow. It was traveling on a trajectory that combined elements of both, carrying kinetic energy that neither weapon alone could have delivered. The ancient writers who documented the Kestrus Fendone were consistent on one point above all others. The wounds it produced were unlike anything previously observed in warfare. The Greek historian Polybius referenced the weapon in his accounts of the conflicts of this period, and his descriptions of its effects were noted with a specificity that indicated genuine first-hand reporting rather than embellishment. Ancient military medicine was experienced with projectile trauma. Physicians who traveled with armies had seen the full range of damage that conventional weapons produced. When those same physicians described Kestrus Fendone wounds as unprecedented, the observation carried weight. The physics behind what made the Kestrus Fendone so effective have been analyzed by historians of ballistics with considerable interest. A sling bullet transfers its energy broadly across its impact surface, while an arrow or dart concentrates its energy into a narrow point. The Kestrus Fendone combines sling-generated velocity with dart-style point concentration. The result was a projectile carrying more kinetic energy than a standard arrow, delivered through a narrower impact area than a sling bullet, at ranges that a thrown dart could never achieve. The penetration characteristics it produced were the direct mathematical outcome of that combination. Nothing about the damage it caused was mysterious once the physics were understood. What remains striking is that someone in the 2nd century BC understood those physics well enough to design around them deliberately. Modern ballistics researchers and military historians have identified the Kestrus Fendone as one of the earliest documented hybrid projectile concepts in human history. The principle it demonstrated, that combining the energy delivery of one weapon system with the penetration geometry of another produces a result neither system achieves independently, is the same principle underlying contemporary kinetic penetrator rounds used to defeat modern vehicle and body armor. The wounds it left behind had no name in the 2nd century BC, but military engineers today would recognize them immediately. If these ancient marvels change how you view the history of warfare and the ingenuity of our ancestors, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the lost technologies and historical secrets that time tried to bury. Help us cultivate the knowledge of the past to understand our future. The next vault of history will open soon.